Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. In this lesson, we'll be analyzing the poem The Stars Go Over the Lonely Ocean by Robinson Jeffers. We begin with the first five lines. Let me read the first five lines. It's going to be very good if you're going to sit with the book in your hands, pointing at each and every word which is being explained over here. Unhappy about some far off things that are not my affair, wandering along the coast and up the lean ridges, I saw in the evening the stars go over the lonely ocean. So the poem speaker goes out for a walk along a mountainous coast one evening in an attempt to clear his head. He's feeling anxious, unhappy about some far off things that are not my affair. So, in other words, he's worried about some global events that he has no real control over. As he walks the lean ridges or narrow hilltops, the speaker looks out and sees the stars go over the lonely ocean. This phrase will be repeated throughout the poem, becoming an important refrain. The stars and the ocean contextualize the speaker's situation as well as that of humanity as a whole. Compared to the immensity of the universe, humanity's problems suddenly seem quite small. This is the context of the stars and the ocean. So the speaker also personifies the ocean here by calling it lonely. That loneliness suggests that the scene is quiet and empty. At the same time, the speaker is likely projecting his own emotions onto the landscape, which is an example of pathetic fallacy. That is, the ocean's loneliness reflects the speaker's sense of isolation from the rest of humankind. The long round assonance of go over the lonely ocean, it evokes it evokes a moan or cry of pain, reflecting the speaker's demoralized attitude. The poem's formal traits help to further convey the speaker's state of mind. Though each stanza has a similar shape on the page, there is no strict meter here. The poem never quite settles into a regular, predictable rhythm. Enjambment is also present, and it adds the sense of restlessness, delaying the arrival of the stanza's main verb, stop, until line 4. Things, wandering, okay? And then ridges के अंदर there is no enjambment because the main verb is here. So the poem, like the speaker, seems to wander down the page, searching for something without knowing what that something is. So the first five lines thus create a quiet, if troubled atmosphere, luring the reader into the poem's mountainous and almost mythical world. With this, we're going to move on to the next two lines, lines 6 and 7. And a black maned wild boar flowing with his snout on Malpaso Mountain. The speaker sees wild boar with black neck hair using his snout or nose to dig through the dirt on Malpaso Mountain. The sight of a boar digging through the dirt is nothing particularly special. This is just what boars do. Yet soon enough, this wild boar will become a symbol in the poem of another way of life, one defined by freedom and instinct, and one distinctly separate from humanity and its politics. The boar has no need for the speaker and doesn't care about the far off things mentioned in the poem's opening line. The poem uses sound to bring this wild creature to life for readers. There is forceful alliteration over here of b, black maned boar, and then per sound, flowing and paso. This forceful alliteration, it evokes the boar's sheer animal power. Then listen also to the round assonance, the assonance of O, of flowing and his snout on mountain, the O sound. Together, these sound devices help to convey the boar's notable, imposing presence. Then move ahead to the next two lines. The old monster snuffled. Here are sweet roots, fat grubs, slick beetles, and sprouted acorns. In the second stanza, the poem takes a dramatic and fable like turn. The wild boar starts to speak. The speaker calls the creature an old monster. People might view boars as monstrous and ruthless, but that's a very human centric perspective. This boar speaks rather eloquently. In fact, as he describes the various delicacies he is digging through the dirt for sweet roots, fat grubs, slick beetles, and sprouted acorns. It is no coincidence that the first thing the board talks about is nature. His priorities are very different from those of the human world, and he is keen to point out his own world's tasty treats. Though what he describes amounts to quite a narrow aspect of nature, things a boar might eat, which are the aspects of nature, his selection nevertheless hints at the astonishing variety of the natural world. The sounds in these lines convey this vivid diversity. Just listen to the quick consonants of sweet roots, then fat grubs, slick beetles, and sprouted acorns. The monosyllabic heaviness of fat grubs, and then the liquidness of the L sounds of slick beetles, then the crispiness of the phrase sprouted acorns. All of these point to a thriving non human environment, and they sound kind of delicious for a boar at least. Moving on, the best nation in Europe has fallen, and that is Finland. But the stars go over the lonely ocean. The old black bristled boar tearing the sod on Malpaso Mountain. The boar abruptly changes the subject to world events, probably the same far off things that the speaker had in mind in line 1. Recall that the poem was written in 1940, so the horrors of World War II were still in their early stages. The sudden shift from talk of juicy grubs to war creates a stark juxtaposition between human and animal affairs. The Boer claims that Finland is, or rather was, the best nation in Europe. Though the Boer laments Finland's fate, he looks beyond humanity for hope. In line 12, the poem's repeated refrain appears, with one small but significant variation, and that is the use of the word but. But the stars go over the lonely ocean. So the Boer prefaces the refrain with but, indicating that the presence of the sea and the stars act as a kind of counterweight to the heaviness of World War II. In essence, the Boer is saying, sure, things look bad for humanity, but the earth is still turning. The stars and the ocean symbolize the vastness of the non human world, which makes human troubles seem utterly insignificant. Next to these enormous, seemingly timeless entities, war becomes a speck of dust. Then again, lines 13 and 14 echo the ending of the previous stanza and will become part of the poem's refrain as well. Compare lines 6 and 7 with 13 and 14. What is it? and a black maned wild boar flowing with his snout on Malpaso mountain. This is line 6 and 7. Compare it with 13 and 14. The old black bristled boar tearing the sword on Malpaso mountain. So these have become the refrains. Those three alliterating B sounds, black breasted boar, evoke the animal's physical ability, its imposing, and its magnificence. More broadly, bringing the poem back to the boar and the mountain, keeping the reader's focus on the boar's place in the natural world. So, in each stanza, the second last line gives the speaker a chance to admire some other aspect of the boar's appearance or character. The last line in each stanza then reinforces the boar's connection with his natural habitat. The boar is the boar is content in his environment and thus subtly offers an example of a different way of life, one that the poem implies humans could do well to learn from. With this, we're going to move on to lines 15 till 21. The world is in a bad way, my man, and bound to be worse before it mends. Better lie up in the mountain here 4 or 5 centuries, while the stars go over the lonely ocean, said the old father of wild pigs, flowing the fallow on Malpaso Mount. The boar warns the speaker that the world is in a bad way and will get worse before it gets better. It is sensible, therefore, that the speaker hides in the mountain here for the next 4 or 5 centuries. By then, maybe things will have blown over, or perhaps humankind will have wiped itself and its problems out completely. In short, the Boer is saying that humanity is doomed. Get out while you still can. The mountain offers a kind of retreat from humanity, a return to a more authentic way of life, like the Boers. Note how the Boer uses casual colloquial language in a bad way and addresses the speaker on familiar terms, calling him my man. This portrays the Boer as a negligent, friendly character, or at least one who harbors no active ill will towards the speaker. Line 19 then then repeats the poem's refrain with one slight change. And that slight change is while. While the stars go over the lonely coast. The Boer uses the passage of the stars over the lonely ocean as an alternative timescale. 4 or 500 years don't seem like much when they are pitted against a planetary timeline. In the grand scheme of things, the poem implies it doesn't really matter what humans do. Civilizations come and go, but the stars and the ocean remain constant. They will still be there when those centuries have passed, as they always have been. The speaker then re-describes the poem as part of the poem's repetitive structure. This time, he is the old father of wild pigs. He is like an ancient pig patriarch, the wise head of a big boar family. He even sounds somewhat godlike, a kind of soothsaying survivalist, offering the speaker an alternative perspective that critiques humankind's arrogant self centeredness. And while the boar talks, he never loses sight of the task at hand. He is plowing the fallow, still digging in the earth for food. With this, we're going to move on ahead. Keep clear of the dupes that talk democracy and the dogs that talk revolution, drunk with liars and believers. In the final stanza, the bore offers the speaker further advice on the state of the world. If the previous stanza diagnosed humanity as being in a bad way, this stanza explores the causes of that sickness. In the bore's view, humankind has chained itself in false belief. It is trapped in a prison of its own design. First, the bore wants the speaker to keep clear of the dupes that talk democracy. The heavy alliteration of dupes and democracy makes the bore sound passionate, even angry. A dupe is a victim of deception. The bore is arguing that democracy, for all its promises of fairness and level headedness, is a scam, and only dupes who have been deceived have been talking about this scam. So Jeffers was an American making this rejection of democracy all the more biting. How can an American person talk against democracy? So democracy is built into the political DNA of the United States. The Boer's point, though not explicitly about the US, is that people should distrust the shiny promises of such a political system as well as the notion that humankind has reached some highly civilized way of operating. Those who express lofty democratic ideals are fooling themselves. In the Boer's estimation, the world the poem implies isn't an equal or fair place. Plus, talking democracy and acting democratically are two very different things. The Boer then takes him at the dogs that talk revolution, drunk with talk, liars and believers. Dogs is a derogatory term here, portraying revolutionaries as foolish failures. The word might also hint that they bark out points rather than thinking independently. The poem is dismissing anyone who thinks that a political revolution makes the world a better place. Such revolutionaries are drunk with talk. They just like the sound of their own voices and get carried away by their ideals. Whether they are actively lying to the people or true believers in their cause makes no difference to the board. Revolution as an idea can be powerful, but in the board's view, it will never fulfill its promises. Note that the word talk appears in three consecutive lines here. This diacope underscores the Boer's point that political talk is key. Keep clear of the dupes that talk democracy and the dogs that talk revolution, drunk with talk lies and belief. Okay, so this appearance of the word three times consecutively, it's this is a diacope, and it highlights the Boer's point that political talk is cheap. Moving ahead, the last lines of this poem. I believe in my dust. Live freedom and damn the ideology, said the gamey black-maned Boer dusting the turf on Malpaso Mountain. Having dismissed you that talk democracy and dogs that talk revolution, the Boer affirms what he does believe. I believe in my tusks, live freedom, and damn the ideology. So all political beliefs to the Boer are deception. He only has faith in himself, in the tools of his own body, not some lofty political idea that ruins people's lives. The Boer's tusks help him survive. He uses them for defense and digging for food. His tusks enable his independence up there on the mountain. The boar then advocates freedom and damns the ideology. Those ideologies, the poem implies, are what got humanity into mess they are in. So, in its final two lines, the poem repeats its now familiar description of the boar and its activity on the mountain. The speaker describes him this time as gamey, most likely meaning brave. Black maned was used in the first stanza, and its repetition here signals the end of a kind of magical intervention. The poem has come full circle. The boar has spoken and now goes back to being a boar. The speaker watches him tusking the turf as if confirming the importance of the boar's tusk. The spiky alliteration of tusking the turf conveys the image of tusks spur into the ground. It is telling too that the last word here is mountain, thus ending the poem with a focus on the natural world, not the human. With this, we are going to move on to the themes of this poem. The first theme happens to be political crisis and disillusion. The stars go over the lonely ocean, looks at humanity's prospects, and comes to a bleak conclusion. It would be best to lay low for a few hundred years while humankind destroys itself through war, self deception, and conflicting ideologies. Written at the start of World War II, the poem takes solace only in the insignificance of humankind. It gives voice to a wild boar who contracts human foolishness with the vast universe beyond Earth. In short, the poem displays a clear sense of disillusionment with humanity and suggests that people would do well to detach themselves from politics altogether. The black maned wild boar explains to the speaker that the world is in bad way, my man, and bound to be worse before it mends. The world is also full of dupes that talk democracy, dogs that talk revolution, and liars and believers. In short, humankind has changed itself in false belief. The illusory promises of politicians on either side of the political divide. That's why the bold laments the fact that Finland has fallen. Finland initially tried to stay neutral in World War II. When it joined in the conflict, it too lost its freedom by picking a side and thereby an ideology. The board thus seems to validate the speaker's initial anxiety rather than teaching him an unexpected lesson. But unlike wild boars, humans can't avoid human politics so easily. What people can avoid, the poem implies, is getting locked into ideology. The second theme happens to be nature versus humanity. The stars go over the lonely ocean contrasts human arrogance and corruption with power and serenity of nature. Though the poem doesn't suggest that nature can save humanity, it does present nature as a setting that's free from short sighted ideology and so endures forever rather than destroying itself. In other words, if holds up the nature, it holds up the natural world as an ideal superior to those humanity constructs for itself. The boar represents an intuitive and natural way of being, free from artificial ways of framing existence. The boar also shows the speaker sweet roots, fat grubs, slick beetles, and sprouted acorns. These remind the speaker and the reader that humankind is not only life on earth, not the center of the universe, life will continue to thrive with or without humankind. Meanwhile, the stars, the ocean, and mountain operate on a time scale that makes all human conflict look petty and temporary. Thus, they model a kind of enduring serenity that humans can aspire to, if only they take the long view. The stars moving overhead offer evidence of a world beyond humanity, subtly supporting the Boer's view that humanity has gotten lost in its own self importance. Nature ultimately gets the last word. With this, we're going to move on the symbol. The first symbol is the stars and the ocean themselves. In the poem, the stars and the ocean act as symbols of nature's permanence as well as its utter indifference to human affairs. For the speaker, humankind's flaws, faults, and weaknesses seem small and petty next to the vastness of the universe. Even a world war fades into insignificance. Finland may have fallen, but that has no effect on the stars or the sea. The earth keeps turning as it always has, unmoved by talk of democracy or revolution. The steady presence of the stars and ocean throughout the poem underlines humanity's arrogant belief that people are the center of the world. Civilians come and go, but the stars and the ocean remain constant. The boar is the next symbol. The boar symbolizes the ideal way of life, a humble, independent existence defined by freedom and connection with the earth. The boar is wild, unbound by human society. He puts his faith in himself and his own tusks rather than what he considers misleading, disappointing ideology. The poem hints that the boar has got it right and that people should similarly detach themselves from humanity's disputes and politics. With this, we're going to move on to the poetic devices and the figurative language. There is alliteration over here, we have already talked about it. There is enjambment, we have talked about it. Then there is anthropomorphism. Now, the stars go over the lonely ocean, anthropomorphizes the wild boar throughout. Now, what is anthropomorphism? It is the attribution of human characteristics, emotions, and behaviors to animals or other non human things. Now, you're going to say that that is personification. No, there is a slight difference between anthropomorphism and personification. Personification is in which things are described figuratively rather than literally as having human characteristics. So sorry, anthropomorphism is actually not figurative. It is literal. Yani कि when the boar, when they start talking and when they start sharing the words of wisdom with the people, that is anthropomorphism. But when the branches of the trees they twist and sway, they are figuratively moving like humans. I hope I've made it easier for you to understand. So, this talking board makes the poem read like a fable. And like all fables, there is a clear lesson here. Long live freedom and damn the ideologies. This is the freedom which is this is the lesson which is being imparted by the board. In other words, people should avoid getting caught up in lofty but empty ideas. They should think for themselves and break free from the ties of political society. Readers might guess that the Boer is really speaking for the poet here. These ideals align with Jeffers' own. But the Boer is a more powerful speaker than a human being might be for a few reasons. For one thing, he is more closely tied to the natural world than the poem's human speaker is. So the Boer's words are backed up by his actions as well. He's wild, he's free, trusting his own tusks more than the political talk. So the poem implies that human beings should strive to be like the Boer too. Having a Boer say all these things also elevates a non human perspective in the poem, reflecting the idea that people and their disputes aren't the center of the universe. The next device is repetition. The stars go over the lonely ocean uses lots of repetition, mainly in the form of a refrain. The phrase, the stars go over the lonely ocean, appears in the fifth line of every stanza apart from the last, while the final two lines of each stanza always describe the wild boar digging through the dirt. This repetition focuses what is really important in the world of the poem, the movement of the sea and stars, as well as the actions of a creature with no interest in humans. Then there is pathetic fallacy. I'm sorry, I have written repetition over here, whereas it was supposed to be written pathetic fallacy over. So the poem, let me write it over here right now. Pathetic fallacy. So the poem uses pathetic fallacy when the speaker calls the ocean lonely. The ocean, of course, can't literally feel loneliness. Instead, the poem's human speaker is imposing his own feelings of isolation onto his surroundings. With this, we're going to talk about the form, meter, and rhyme. The form. The stars go over the lonely ocean can be considered a fable. It features a talking animal who imparts wisdom. Structurally, the poem consists of four 7 line stanza. These regular stanza shape gives this free verse poem some steadiness and consistency. Despite featuring a talking boar, the poem still feels serious and measured. The next is the meter. Now, this poem is written using free verse, meaning there is no regular meter over it. Note too that all stanzas have a pretty uniform shape on the page. The fourth line of each stanza is always shorter than the rest, as though the stanza is being squeezed in the middle. It's subtle, but this creates a gentle wave like pattern from long to short to long again, perhaps gently mimicking the movements of the ocean. Rhyme scheme. Aside from a few half rhymes here and there is not much rhyming going on in the stars go over the lonely ocean. Ocean, mountain are the few examples. The lack of rhyme seems to capture the speaker's wandering, both physical and mental, and provides the poem with a ruggedness that fits its star character, the wild boar. A full rhyme scheme might make the poem feel sillier or more childish given the presence of a talking animal. The speaker, in his embrace of individual freedom, his appreciation of nature, and his rejection of politics, the Boer's attitude reflects that of Jeffers himself. Jeffer was a staunch environmentalist who criticized what he viewed as humanity's selfishness and arrogance, and he also quite controversially opposed US involvement in World War II. Now the literary context. Robinson Jeffers from 1887 to 1962 was an American poet and environmentalist, known both for his narrative epic poetry and his shorter, more lyrical verse. An avid outdoorsman, Jeffers also wrote often about the beauty and power of the natural world. He lived for a long time on the California coast, which features in this and many other poems. Indeed, Malpaso Mountain here likely refers to Malpaso Creek, which is in California, where Jeffers spent the latter half of his life. The Stars Go Over the Only Lonely Ocean was first published in an April 1940 edition of Poetry magazine alongside Jeffers' poem 1939, Finland is Down, Great Men, and The Bloody Sire. All of these poems were inspired by World War II, which is also what the far off things in line 1 of this poem refers to. The poem also showcases a worldview that Jeffers called inhumanism, which he said involves a shifting of emphasis from man to not man. In other words, it values the non human natural world and rejects the view that human beings are the most important creatures on earth. With this, we're going to move on to the last part, which is the historical context. The poem alludes directly to its historical context in lines 10 to 11. The best nation in Europe has fallen, and that is Finland. This is an allusion. So, this was written and is set at the beginning of World War II, the second conflict to cause unfathomable death, despair, and destruction during the 20th century. World War II began in 1939 when Britain and France declared war on Germany following Hitler's invasion of Poland. By the time the war ended in 1945, 40 to 60 million people had died. Though humankind had made huge technological advancements in the previous decades, for many, these two brutal wars undermined the sense that those technological advancements constituted actual progress. From this poem's perspective, civilization is a kind of lie that humanity sells to itself, and that's why the Boer thinks it is better to lie low for a few hundred years in the mountains. The poem, published alongside The Stars Go Over the Lonely Ocean, was Finland is Down. It makes clear that the Boer here refers to the Moscow Peace Treaty, signed by Finland following an invasion of its territory by Soviet forces. Finland maintained its independence but was also forced to surrender 9% of its territory to the USSR. Though World War II is undoubtedly a key focus in the poem, the true targets are wider than just that one conflict. Jeffers and the Boer in the poem argues that all politics tends towards lies, corruption, and mindless bias. With this, we are going to end this lesson. I hope you understood everything. Please feel free to ask if you've got any questions.